Hi everyone, my name is Jimo Leborde and our group will discuss to you all about the public finance. But first, before we go to the proper discussion, let's define first what is public finance. So according to this, public or the development of public finance refers to the evolution of how governments manage their income, spending, and debt. It encompasses the historical growth of financial management in the public sector, the development of theories around taxation and fiscal policy, and the implementation of policies for economic stability and resource allocation. Over time, public finance has become increasingly complex, addressing issues like budgeting, public debt, and economic growth, reflecting the changing needs of societies. Then now let's proceed to the context. First is the beginning, then the development of mercantilism, some important contributions. Then the other one is bureaucracy, then the depression and Keynesian economics, and the last one is the Philippine setting. Let's first go to the introduction. What is public finance? Public finance is the study of the role of the government in the economy. It is the branch of economics which assesses the government revenue and government expenditure of the public authorities and the adjustment of one or the other to achieve desirable effects and avoid undesirable ones. Public finance is concerned with the income and expenditure of the public authorities and with the adjustment of one to another. Accordingly, effects of taxation, government expenditure, public borrowing, and deficit financing of the economy constitute the subject matter of the public finance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Asian finance, the slave society's expenditures. Asian public finance was therefore characterized by enormous public expenditure for defense and aggression. This sentence is discussing the nature of public finance in ancient times, particularly how governments spend their money. Public expenditures refers to the money spent by the government or ruling authority. The phrase enormous public expenditure for defense and aggression means that a large portion of the government budget was dedicated to military-related activities. In ancient societies, much of the government resources were used to fund armies, build fortification, and wage wars. Defense refers to protecting the state from external threats, while aggression implies taking military action to expand territory or exert influence over others. So the sentence is highlighting that in ancient times, a significant amount of public money was spent on maintaining and expanding military power. And second function, peace and order for the ruling minority was also a primary concern, which makes the preservation of internal peace, order, and security the secondary primary function of ancient government. In ancient societies, government were often controlled by a ruling minority, whether that was a monarchy, aristocracy, or another form of elite group. One of their primary concern was maintaining their own power and control over the population. To achieve this, preserving internal peace, order, and security was crucial. This means the government focused on preventing uprising, maintaining law and order, and ensuring that the general population remained compliant and peaceful. By doing so, the ruling minority could continue to govern without significant threats to their authority. The third function was the maintenance of a state religion. Maintenance of a state religion, this means that one of the rules or responsibility of the state was to support and uphold a particular religion as the official or dominant religion of the state. This might include funding religious institutions, organizing religious ceremonies, building and maintaining temples, churches or mosques, and ensuring the religious practices are observed in accordance with state laws. The fourth function was the maintenance of the king and his household. Maintenance of the king and his household. This refers to the state's responsibility to to financial support the monarch and the royal family. This would involve providing funds for the living expenses of the king, his family, and the operation of the royal household. The expenditures could include the upkeep of the royal palaces, salaries for the royal staff, expenses for ceremonies, travel, and other needs of the monarchy. A significant portion of the state expenditure was allocated to ensure that the king and his household were maintained in a manner befitting their status. This was a crucial function of the state, particularly in monarchies where the king's role was central to the governance and stability of the country. And the fifth function is in the slave societies. It was also a common practice to construct and maintain public works. In slave societies, the construction and maintenance of public works such as roads, aqueducts, temples, fortification, and other infrastructure were often carried out using slave labor. These societies relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved people to build and maintain essential structures and services that benefited the public and the state. In ancient civilization like Rome, Greece, and Egypt, large number of enslaved people were used for this massive project. For example, the construction of the Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and various monumental buildings often involved the labor of thousands of slaves. The state or wealthy individual who controlled these societies would organize and oversee this project, viewing enslaved labor as a resource to be exploited for the greater good of society or the ruling elite. And lastly, distribution of free grain in times of famine. Public recreation and physical education were also included. Distribution of free grain during famines or food shortages. Free grain distribution was a way for ruling elites to address immediate needs and prevent unrest. By providing free grain, the state could help mitigate the suffering of the poor and lower classes, including enslaved people, while also demonstrating their benevolence and maintaining social order. This practice was seen in ancient Rome, for instance, where grain dole systems helped to stabilize society during times of crisis. And public recreation. Public entertainment and festivals were used to keep the population engaged and distracted. These events serve multiple purposes. This provide a way for the ruling class to display their generosity, offer the form of social control by keeping people occupied, and reinforce the social hierarchy by showcasing the power and wealth of the elite. And physical education. In some societies, physical education and training were emphasized, particularly for the elite or future leaders. This could involve structured programs in athletic training or military drills. For enslaved people, physical conditioning was often about maintaining physical strength to perform labor efficiently, though in some societies, enslaved individual might also be trained in specific skills or trades. Revenues. The only sources of income for the slave state were typically looting and tributes from conquered people, wages, penalties, and direct taxes imposed on non-citizen of the state. Donations and gifts from the state wealthiest residents made up the other sources of income, looting, and tributes from conquered peoples. When a state expanded through conquest, it would often seize wealth and resources from the defeated territories. This could include money, valuable goods, and other forms of plunder. Additionally, conquered peoples might be required to pay tributes or regular payments to the state, which serve as a steady source of income. And next is war chests. These were reserves of wealth accumulated specifically for financing military campaigns. The money in war chests would come from various sources including loot, tributes, and other forms of state income. These funds ensure that the state could support ongoing or future military endeavors. And penalties. Fines and penalties imposed on individuals or groups for various infractions or offenses also contributed to state revenue. This could be levied on both citizens and non-citizens and were often a significant source of income. Direct taxes on non-citizens. In many slave societies, non-citizens or subjects who live under the state's control were taxed directly. This could include taxes on property, income, or other assets were collected from those who did not have the same rights or status as citizens. Donations and gift. Wealthy residents or elites of the state might make voluntarily contribution of gift to me. State this donation could be motivated by a desire to gain favor, fulfill social or religious obligation, or demonstrate loyalty to the ruling class. These sources of revenue allowed slave states to maintain their operations, support public works, fund military activities, and reinforce their control over both their own citizens and conquered peoples. Budgeting was used because it was necessary to distribute public funds for particular uses. There was no separation between the king's private and public spending because the national budget and his personal funds were combined. In slave states, budgeting was crucial for allocating funds to various public needs such as infrastructure, military expenses, and public welfare. However, there was often no clear distinction between the ruler's personal finances and state funds. The national budget and the king's private expenditure were combined, meaning that the ruler's personal wealth was used interchangeably with public resources. This lack of separation allowed the ruler to control indirect financial resources more directly, but also blurred the lines between personal and state finances. The ancient state did not borrow money even in emergencies. In only solicited gift or levied limited taxes. In ancient slave states, borrowing money as a financial strategy was not commonly practiced even during emergency. Instead, these states relied on other methods to raise funds. Soliciting gift. The state often sought a voluntary contribution from wealthy individuals or elites. These gifts could provide necessary funds during times of crisis or for specific projects. And levying unlimited taxes. States imposed taxes on their subjects, but these were usually kept to a minimum. The taxes were often levied on non-citizen or specific groups rather than the general population, reflecting the state's reliance on more controlled and predictable sources of revenue. Auditing. Since Asian public finance was limited to tax and expenditure aspects, state audit was primarily concerned with the maintenance and inspection of financial records to ensure the regularity of accounts and the legality of expenditure. In ancient states, auditing focused on overseeing financial records to ensure accuracy and legality. Since public finance mainly involved taxes and expenditures, audits were concerned with maintenance and inspection, keeping detailed records of financial transactions and expenditures, regularity of accounts, ensuring that accounts were accurate and up to date, legality of expenditures, verifying that spending and adhered to established laws and regulation. The goal was to prevent mismanagement and ensure that funds were used appropriately. Medieval public finance. The evolution of medieval public finance paralleled the changes in the state's political structure inextricably. These changes included the beginning of the medieval periods, weakening of monarchy, the development of feudalism, and the emergence of limited monarchy at the end of the era. During the feudal era, taxation was closely linked to the ownership of land. Feudal lords collected tributes from the peasant in exchange for protection in the use of land. This marked a continuation of organized revenue collection for communal purposes.
Also, mercantilism was a dominant economic theory in Europe from the 16th to the 18th centuries, focused on accumulating national wealth through a favorable balance of trade. This was achieved by maximizing exports and minimizing imports, often through government intervention such as high tariffs and trade regulations. Colonies played a key role by providing raw materials and markets for the mother country's goods. While mercantilism shaped global trade and colonial expansion, it eventually declined as thinkers like Adam Smith introduced ideas of free markets and minimal government interference, laying the foundation for modern economics. So maintaining a favorable trade balance by maximizing exports and minimizing imports with other countries. Then also, the purpose of mercantilism is to empower a nation's via wealth and resource acquisition while improving its military and political might. So we have the four key features of mercantilism. First is the bullionism. Then second one is the colonialism and expansion. The third one is the trade regulation, and the last one is the government roles. Now, let's proceed to bullionism. It was an early economic theory prominent in the 16th and 17th century that was equated a nation's wealth with its accumulation of precious metals, particularly gold and silver. It advocated for a favorable balance of trade, encouraging countries to export more than they imported so that the surplus could be paid in bullion. This theory promoted government intervention in the economy, such as imposing tariffs and providing subsidies to achieve trade surpluses. Closely tied to the economic nationalism, bullionism prioritized the accumulation of wealth within a nation's borders. However, as economic though evolved, it was criticized and eventually replaced by more sophisticated theories, such as those presented by Adam Smith, which recognized wealth as being tied to the overall production and trade of goods and services rather than the accumulation of bullion. Then, the colonialism and expansion. Colonialism involves a nation extending its control over other territories to exploit their resources and impose its own system, often involving the settlement of colonies. Expansion, while refers more broadly to a country's extending its influence or territory, which can include various methods such as military conquest or economic influence. In the context of mercantilism, both colonialism and expansion were driven by the desire to accumulate wealth through control of resources and trade routes. Mercantilism emphasized the importance of a favorable balance of trade and the accumulation of precious metals, which colonial and expansionist policies aimed to achieve by establishing colonies and exploiting new territories for economic gain. Then, the third one is trade regulation. It involves the government imposed rules to manage international and domestic trade. including tariffs, quotas, and trade agreements. In mercantilism, trade regulation was a vital for achieving a positive balance of trade, which meant exporting more than importing to accumulate wealth in the form of precious metals. Mercantilist policies use trade regulations to protect domestic industries, limit foreign competition, and encourage exports, thereby enhancing national wealth and power through controlled and favorable trade policies. The last one is the government's roles. In mercantilism, the government's role was crucial and highly interventionist. Governments regulated trade through tariffs and quotas, promoted exports and with subsidies, established trading monopolies, and controlled resources to ensure a favorable balance of trade and accumulate wealth. Their active involvement was aimed at increasing nationals' wealth and power by managing and directing economic activities.
In this History Illustrated video, we will be discussing mercantilism. So what is mercantilism? Basically, it's just an economic system. When talking about economic things, that means you're talking about the economy, or simply put, money. So who is involved in mercantilism? It was started by European powers, and was primarily led by the big three, so that's Spain, France, and England. But there were other major players too, such as Portugal and the Dutch. But most European countries were involved in some way. As the Renaissance began in Europe, the Middle Ages started to come to an end, and Europeans began to explore the world. So during the 1400s, the Portuguese began to colonize pieces of Africa, and in 1492, Columbus landed in America. After this, it was a race for all the countries of Europe to find new lands that they hadn't heard of and claim a piece for themselves. Each European country that claimed territory could bring back wealth they collected, things like gold or exotic things that they had never even seen, and merchants could sell these items, and this would make the mother country very, very wealthy. And all of this wealth meant that leaders of these countries would gain more power. And with this power, they would be a respected country in the neighborhood and they could get what they wanted. Without it, though, you might be the small country that was bullied around. This led to an intense rivalry between all of these countries, and the competition was fierce. So how did mercantilism work? Well, once new land was claimed by European powers, they would establish a colony. These colonies would work in a couple of different ways. First, that meant that they would become a new market, which means it's a place that I could sell things to, which means I would make money. And that means money is coming back to Europe. The resources of these colonies were also collected and sent back to Europe too. These resources are called raw materials. European merchants would then manufacture these items or turn them into something else. For example, a country could cut down trees for lumber and send it to Europe, where a manufacturer would turn that lumber into things like furniture. We call these things manufactured goods. Under this system, Europeans created some rules for gaining wealth too. Colonies were not allowed to trade with whoever they wanted. They could only trade with their mother country. For example, an English colony could not sell their lumber to France. Even if France was paying more, they would be required to sell it to England. This concentrated the wealth with the mother countries. Europe was able to grow very powerful over the course of a few centuries with this system, but it had a lot of effects outside of what their original intentions were too. For example, let's look at the economic impact. Their goal was to gain a lot of power, and that definitely happened. Europe emerged as the dominant power of the world. They would have colonies on every continent outside of Antarctica and create the largest empires in the history of the entire world. Also during this time, industrialization would start under the leadership of the European powers, and that would greatly affect every person's life forever. The social and cultural impact was vast too. Christianity, for example, spread throughout the world, and it remains the largest religion today. Millions of people would be enslaved and forced to live on different continents, which leaves a legacy that still affects many countries today as well. Some civilizations were completely conquered, while other groups of people were exterminated directly or indirectly through disease or war. And the disappearance of entire cultures has an effect that we're never going to know. Politically, it completely changed the world as well. Europe would rebuild the world in an image of their legal systems based on values that they inherited from ancient Greece and Rome. Other countries either adopted those ideas, embraced them, or they were forced to use something similar just so they can engage with the rest of the world. Environmentally, the world experiences an exchange that was never seen before. Plants, animals, and other resources find their ways to the other ends of the earth, which allows us to experience things as simple as tomatoes being used in Italian food for the first time, all the way to things like the communal views of Native Americans on land being completely dismissed so they could be bought and sold as private property, which later makes way for an agricultural development that allowed our population of the world to go from under a billion to more than 7 billion in just a couple of centuries. Essentially, mercantilism had many effects, and it continues to leave its mark on the world today. The first colonies of the system were established in the 1400s and lasted for about 500 years. However, after World War II, they experienced so much destruction that they could no longer control their colonies. One by one, their colonies would declare their independence, and the once powerful European powers were now powerless to stop them. And what they had built for centuries fell apart in just a couple of decades.
Now, let's proceed to pishocracy. It is an economic theory that emerged in the 18th century primarily in France. As a challenge to the prevailing mercantilist doctrine of the time, it posits that the wealth of nations is derived from the value of land agriculture or land development, and that agricultural products should be highly valued in industrial goods. So, meaning ng physis, or here is the Latin word physis, means nature, and gratia means rule of power. It is founded by Francois Quincey, a French economist and a physician. The Pishocrats believe in several fundamental principles. We have the laissez-faire, the productive labor, the single taxation, and the circulation of wealth. We will further discuss this in the next video. Here is the fundamental principles. First is the laissez-faire. It advocated minimal government intervention in the economy, allowing natural economic laws to govern economic activities. Second one is the productive labor. It stressed agriculture as the primary source of wealth due to its ability to produce a surplus beyond subsistence. Here is the next one, the single taxation. It proposed a single tax on land rents or impot unique to fund government activities as land was seen as the source of all wealth. Circulation of wealth. It emphasized the importance of wealth circulating through the economy, benefiting in different sectors and individuals. Here are the last two fundamental principles. The agriculture as key. Pishocrats believed that the agriculture production was the only productive economic activity generating a surplus or a net product that supported other sectors. The last one was government revenue, advocated for the single tax on land rents as means to fund government activities without hindering productive sectors. So, the decline in influence of Shocracy. Shocracy is influence waned in the late 18th century as the economic theories gained prominence. Despite its decline, some principles like limited government intervention and emphasis on productive activities remain relevant. Then, the legacy in modern relevance. While not widely accepted today, Shocracy contributed to the development of economic law that influenced discussion on economic policy and theory. Some of the ideas continue to resonate, particularly the role of agriculture in generating wealth and the importance of allowing certain economic activities to operate freely.
Good day everyone, I am Kristen S. Tumagin, and today I will be discussing one of the most significant events in economic history, which is the Great Depression and the revolutionary economic theories of John Maynard Keynes, known as Keynesian economics. We'll explore how the Great Depression unfolded and how Keynes' ideas reshape economic policy, influencing how governments manage economies even today. The Great Depression was a severe global economic downturn that originated from a sharp decline in stock prices in the United States, leading to a prolonged period of economic depression lasting from 1929 to 1939. The Great Depression began in 1929 and lasted through most of 1930s. It was triggered by the stock market crash in October 1929, famously known as the Black Tuesday. This crash led to a severe economic downturn that spread across the globe, resulting in massive unemployment, deflation, and widespread poverty. In the United States, the unemployment rate reached a staggering of 25%. The causes of Great Depression were complex and interrelated. First, there was overproduction. Factories produced more goods than people could afford to buy. Second, stock market speculation led to inflated stock prices because many people were buying stocks on margin, essentially with borrowed money. Third, bank failures were widespread, as banks had made risky loans and couldn't recover the money when the market crashed. Finally, global trade declined as countries raised tariffs, making it more expensive to import goods, which further hurt economies worldwide. Keynesian economics is a macroeconomic theory focusing on total spending and its impact on output employment and inflation. British economist John Maynard Keynes developed Keynesian economics during the 1950s in response to the Great Depression. Keynes believed that government intervention is crucial for stabilizing the economy. Amidst the crisis, British economist Maynard Keynes introduced a new approach to economic policy that challenged the traditional laissez-faire or hands-off approach. Keynes believed that governments should actively manage the economy, particularly during economic downturns, to prevent situations like the Great Depression from happening again. At the core of Keynesian economics is the concept of aggregate demand, which is the total demand for goods and services in the economy. Keynes argued that during recessions, aggregate demand often falls short, leading to unemployment and economic stagnation. To counter this, Keynes advocated for government intervention. Specifically, he suggested that governments should increase their spending and lower taxes during downturns to boost demand. This would stimulate production, create jobs, and ultimately lead to economic recovery. Keynes also introduced the idea of multiplier effect, where government spending not only directly increases demand, but also leads to more income and further increases in demand. The Keynesian economics theory helped shape modern macroeconomics. Keynes' ideas became the foundation for how governments manage economies today. In policy legacy, government intervention in the economy is now standard practice during recessions. Last is global influence. Keynesian policies were adopted worldwide, influencing economic recovery efforts after the Great Depression. Keynesian economics didn't just help during the Great Depression, it fundamentally shaped modern macroeconomic policy. Keynes' ideas became the foundation for how governments around the world manage their economies today. The concept of government intervention to smooth out economic cycles is now standard practice, particularly during recessions.
The Philippine setting is a specific economic, social, political circumstances that unique to the Philippines. So in terms of public finance, it means examining how the principles, theories, and practices of public finance apply and are adapted to the country's specific conditions and challenges. The Philippines' public finance system is essential in overseeing the nation's revenue, spending, and debt management. The government has implemented fiscal reforms to drive economic growth, enhance budget transparency, and keep debt levels sustainable, making public finance a crucial part of the country's development efforts. Here are some financial management and activities of the Philippine government: taxation, government spending, resource mobilization, public debt management, and decentralization. I will discuss it one by one. The first one is taxation. It is considering the most appropriate tax policies and tax rates given the economic disparities and income distribution in the Philippines. So, we all know that tax is a compulsory financial charge. Taxation is the fact of imposing taxes and the fact of being taxed, while tax is money paid to the government other than for transaction specific goods and services. So, by paying taxes to governments or official has been a mainstay of civilization since ancient times. Taxation and public finance, it includes revenue generation, tax collection efficiency, budget allocation, and tax compliance. So, in revenue generation is the process of obtaining funds for the Philippine government use through taxes, fees, and other sources. In tax collection efficiency, it is the effectiveness with which a government collects taxes, including how will it minimize evasion and administrative costs. In budget allocation, it is the distribution of available funds among various governments, departments, and programs based on priorities and needs. So, in tax compliance, it is the extent to which individuals, the business follow the tax laws and regulation, including timely and accurate filing of and payment of government taxes. Spending is addressing the allocation of government resources to various sectors like education, healthcare, infrastructure, and social welfare programs, keeping in mind the country's development goals and challenges. A wise government spending is important because it ensures the efficient use of taxpayer money, supports economic growth, fosters public trust, promotes social equity, and prevents excessive debt. Proper allocation of funds leads to a better infrastructure, public services, and long-term development benefiting the entire nation. Government spending and public finance. So in public expenditure allocation, it is the process of deciding how the government funds are distributed across various programs and services, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. So, an economic stabilization is measure taken by the government to smooth out the economic fluctuations and maintain economic stability, often through fiscal policies like adjusting spending and taxation. So, in public goods and services, it is a product and services provided by the government for the benefit of all citizens, such as national defense, public education, and infrastructure. These are typically funded through taxation.
20 million pesos daw ang budget para sa State of the Nation address ni President Marcos sa July 22. Nag-walkthrough kami sa Batasan Pambansa at nakita namin kung saan yun ginastos, or at least part of it. Pagpasok mo pa lang sa Batasan, noticeable na bago yung tiles at naka-aircon na rin ang lobby. At dito naman, may LED screens na. Interactive pa siya. Halos everywhere we look, may mga bagong pieces of furniture. May boxes pa na mukhang bagong bukas lang. At parang naghahabol pa ng finishing touches for the big day.
Pinapakita lang sa atin ngayon kung ano yung mangyayari on the day off. So, ito daw ang parang pinakamalaking pool of attendance so far. So, bukod dito sa session hall, meron pa silang ibang holding area para sa mga guests.
Ito yung magiging holding area for members of the Diplomatic Corps. Ito naman, para sa iba pang VIP. Tignan nyo naka-plastic pa yung carpet. Part of the 20 million peso budget kasi covered the renovations here at Batasan. Kasama pa yung 3 sets of uniforms for the Secretariat employees. Maraming nag-comment na parang sobra naman daw yung budget for SONA. Pero tingin mo, deserve ba yung 20 million pesos?
In resource mobilization, it explores strategies to generate revenues for government operations and projects, while considering the country's unique economic structure, informal sector, and taxation compliance issues. So, for example, the NAIA Expressway project in the Philippines is a public-private partnership where San Miguel Corporation funded, built, and operates the expressway connecting NAIA terminals to major roads in Metro Manila. So the revenue is generated through toll fees benefiting both the private partner and the government. which uses its shares of the revenue for other public services. So this project illustrates effective resource mobilization without heavily relying on taxation, addressing infrastructure needs while considering the challenges of a large informal sector. In resource mobilization in public finance, it includes taxation, non-tax revenue, borrowing, and remittances. Taxation is what I've said earlier. It is the process by which governments collect revenue from individuals and businesses through various forms of taxes such as income tax, sales tax, and property tax. Next is non-tax revenue. It is income generated by the government from sources other than taxes, such as fees, fines, and profits from government-owned enterprises. One is borrowing. It is acquiring funds by taking loans or issuing bonds, which the government must repay with interest used to finance budget deficits or specific projects. The last one is remittances. It is the money sent back to the home country by individuals working abroad, which can supplement national income and affect public finance. In public debt management, it discusses how the Philippine government manages its debt obligation given the country's creditworthiness, borrowing costs, and potential impacts on economic growth. So, the Philippine government issued retail treasury bonds to raise domestic funds and reduce reliance on foreign debt and manage public debt sustainability. So, in February 2021, they successfully raised 463.3 billion peso using the funds for pandemic response and economic recovery while promoting financial inclusion among Filipinos. Public debt management and public finance. It includes financing government operations, capital expenditures, debt sustainability, and lastly is the creditworthiness. So the first one is financing government operation. The public debt serves as a source of financing for government operation, especially when revenues from taxes and other sources are insufficient to cover expenditures. Next is capital expenditures. This allows the government to fund important development initiatives that might not be feasible through current revenues alone. In debt sustainability, proper debt management aims to maintain debt a sustainability relative to the size of the economy, which is GDP. Lastly is creditworthiness. An effective debt management enhances the government's creditworthiness, allowing it to access financing at favorable terms. Lastly, decentralization. It is considered as the distribution of fiscal powers and responsibilities among different levels of government like national, regional, and local, in the context of the Philippine political structure. So, the Local Government Code of 1991 in the Philippines decentralized power by giving local governments control over their finances and services, like healthcare. For example, Iloilo province used its increased autonomy to improve local hospitals using its shares of national taxes. Decentralization and public finance. So, in revenue generation, it is the process by which local governments or decentralized entities collect funds through taxes, fees, and other sources specific to their jurisdiction. So, the fiscal autonomy is the extent to which local governments have the authority to make financial decisions, including setting tax rates and managing their budgets independently from central authorities. The local expenditure is spending by local governments on services and projects within their jurisdiction such as education, transportation, and public safety. In accountability and participation mechanisms, it ensured that the local governments are answerable to their citizens for their financial decisions and expenditures, and encouraging public involvement in budgeting and policy-making processes. Last one is local debt management. The strategies and practices used by local governments to manage their borrowing and repayment obligations, ensuring they can sustain debt levels without financial distress. That's all. Thank you for listening.